Welcome everyone to the Lown Cardiovascular Group Weekly Health and Wellness Webinar. Nice to see everybody here again this week. Thank you for joining us. I'm excited about our presentation today. And just as a quick reminder, we will ask everyone to enter your questions in through the Q&A. And we'll plan for Q&A and nice discussion following the lecture, and Dr. Lee Lewis and I will help moderate that with our speaker. So welcome Skyler Griggs. She is a registered dietitian and a nutrition counselor who has an appointment at Children's Hospital and works closely with the cardiology division there, and also runs Newberry Street Nutrition and sees many of our patients in her private practice. So she is well qualified to deal with all of our nutrition questions today, and I'm excited to find out these myths versus facts. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm just going to pull up my screen for a second and share it with you all. Great. So, there we go. One second. Okay. So, all right, from start. Great. Okay, so thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here, and today I am just going to spend some time sort of sorting through the facts and fiction around nutrition and discuss some timely information in the setting of this new normal that we're all living in. There will be some polling questions as we go through that we are kind of trying to get off the ground, and if we can't get them off the ground, you can just make a note yourself, and then I'll share the answer with you as we go. So we'll kind of test your nutrition knowledge. So I'm sure many of you are aware of this, but just to look at the current numbers. So over 2/3 of the US population right now is considered to have an elevated BMI or be overweight or obese. And should this stay consistent, we're looking at a really large number as we go into 2030 of about 51% of the population. And this is before COVID and this pandemic hit and people are home more and eating more at home. And so we know that we've learned that people who have an elevated BMI are at an increased risk for hospitalization for COVID. So this has kind of become a bit more of a motivator for people to kind of get, maybe make some changes to their diet. And there's definitely some treatment challenges around an increased BMI in the setting of COVID-19. Looking at some of the trends over time, these are the obesity maps, and it takes a look from 1990 all the way to 2015. We should be getting the new ones shortly, I hope. But you can see over time just a trend towards the red, as I like to call it, or looking at states where the obesity rates are higher, and kind of getting an idea that this has been a progressive change over time. And so making changes to our lifestyle now are going to hopefully down the road prevent some of these more red states. So if I could take nutrition in a simplest form, I would take a quote from Michael Pollan, who is a really well-known food writer, and he says, "Eat foods, not too much, mostly plants." And it sounds really simple, and I'm not a proponent of a huge proponent of a vegan diet, but the idea here is that we're cutting down on a lot of the processed and packaged foods and focusing on whole and real foods. And his approach is that it's not about, he calls it nutritionism. So it's not about getting enough vitamin A or vitamin B. It's about eating the whole food and getting the whole nutrition from the food. And that's kind of the big picture that I'd love everyone to walk away from today is eating foods. Not too much would be focusing on portion size and mostly plants. So I'm going to talk through today how we can put those things into action. So it gets really confusing because we see something that simple and then we look around and we see all this information. Things like, is the food low fat? Is it free range? Does it contain antioxidants? And it's really hard to decipher what this information means and how it can be of help to us. So are things heart healthy? Do they have GMOs? What should we pay attention to? Because there's just so much. The diet industry is a multi-billion-dollar business. And so when you have these many marketing claims kind of coming in front of you, especially from a cardiac perspective, maybe it's a blood pressure or cholesterol perspective, what do we look at and what's important? How do we kind of narrow it down? So my agenda today is to just briefly touch on lifestyle changes that you can make to boost your immune system, many of which you've probably already talked about with your cardiologist. 8 food myth and facts. I'm going to discuss a little bit about health halos and diet fads, demystifying the nutrition label, and a Q&A. And in the essence of time, I'll just kind of spend a little bit of time on each, and then if we have questions at the end, we can absolutely circle back. So in terms of your immune system, whether it's COVID-19 or just the seasonal flu, one of the most important things that you can do is promote a good gut bacteria, or what we call your gut microbiome. So including foods that have pre and probiotics in them, we know can really help to balance out your gut microbiome. And you can think of your gut microbiome as kind of the community of the microbes, or the things that live in your belly that support your immune system. And we know that very much, I think it's over 75% of our immune system lives in our gut. And so nourishing our gut and feeding our microbiome is really important. Fruits and vegetables are natural sources of pre and probiotics. Things like artichokes and asparagus, they feed the good bacteria in the gut. Other ways that we can boost our immune system are doing things like getting 8 hours of sleep a night, which seems a little bit easier during COVID, but we also have this stress of this kind of uncertainty, and stress management definitely plays a role in the immune system as well. Incorporating vitamin D rich food sources, those that are also high in omega-3s, so things like eggs and salmon and tuna and certain dairy products. We know that those have been linked to an increased immune system, as well as exercise, from getting vitamin D from the sun to building healthy endorphins that help reduce stress. Exercise definitely, as you all know, yields a benefit far beyond just your immune system. And water. I think water is something that people often forget about and is particularly difficult throughout the course of the day if you don't have anything in front of you to remind you to drink water. So unless you are on a fluid restriction, which many people are, trying to aim for at least 2 liters of water or some kind of fluid a day is very beneficial. So if I had to take that Michael Pollan quote and then kind of put it into a picture, I would actually use the Harvard Healthy Eating Plate, it's a little bit different than the My Plate, which I still agree with. It just goes into a little bit more detail on things like mono and polyunsaturated fats, making sure you're getting in enough water, and an emphasis on non-starchy vegetables. So if we know that we want to eat foods and mostly plants and not too much, then the idea is that we want about half of our meal to be some kind of fruits and vegetables. Fruits and vegetables are rich sources of fiber, as well as antioxidants, vitamins, and minerals. We really try to encourage the use of whole grains, so things like whole wheat bread, whole wheat pasta, brown rice, and limiting white and refined grains. So for individuals who have high triglycerides, a portion of their cholesterol called triglycerides that are high, we try to tell people if it's white, don't bite. So try not to focus on the white breads, the white pastas, and shift a little bit more towards the whole grains. And then of course, thinking about different sources of proteins. If you're someone who has high blood pressure or an elevated LDL cholesterol, you might not want to eat a lot of red meat. So maybe you're focusing on things like fish and poultry and beans, and trying to stay away from a lot of things, preserved meats like bacon and cold cuts. So I really like this picture of the plate. You can just get it on the Harvard School of Public Health website. It also addresses staying active. And I find it to be just kind of a nice, simple guideline. So my first question, and if I can figure out the, from current slide, if I can figure out the poll, I will definitely try. But my first question is, does skipping meals produce weight loss? And so I think if we're able to poll the audience, that would be great. Were we able to poll the audience? Let's see. Oh. We might be polling the audience right now.
Skyler, I have to say, I'm not sure that it's working correctly.
Okay.
This, for everybody, was our first attempt at this, so.
That's all right. I can go along, and then if it does happen to get up and running, we can jump in. So, okay, I'm just going to close that. So does skipping meals equal weight loss? So this is something that, you know, I used to address this question. The answer is the same in the end, but I used to address the question a little bit differently before intermittent fasting kind of came into the nutrition world. But from the very basic point of view, skipping meals does not necessarily equal weight loss. And the reason for that is because weight loss, you know, if you're going extended periods of time between meals, you're slowing down your metabolism. And it might produce weight loss in the short term from muscle mass, but what it could do is create overindulgences later. So what I often see is that somebody will come to me and they're not eating breakfast, they're eating a little bit for lunch, and they're eating large amounts at dinner and then later on. And what ends up happening is that if you're sleeping and then you wake up and you don't have much to eat and you eat the majority of your calories in the evening, unfortunately, what that does is it perpetuates weight gain because you're getting most of your calories at a time right before you're going to bed. And these overindulgences later are just a result of kind of the blood sugar cycle kind of being up and down. And so over time, people might notice a lack of energy or find it hard to focus. So we definitely don't want you to skip meals. And ideally, we want you to try to eat every 3 to 4 hours if you can. So with that comes this question that I guess get asked all the time, which is about this process of intermittent fasting. And for those who are not familiar with intermittent fasting, it's defined as alternating cycles between eating and not eating. And I did hear that you had a webinar on this recently, so I'm not going to spend too much time. The research is really preliminary right now in terms of the benefits for weight management and gut health and inflammation. But if you decide that with your provider or with a dietitian that you want to try intermittent fasting, it's strongly recommended that you kind of ease into it by starting with a 12-hour fast as opposed to jumping right to a 16-hour fast. There are people who would not be great candidates for intermittent fasting. And these are people with any history of an active or with an active eating disorder, those who are pregnant or breastfeeding, people with diabetes, especially those on insulin, because insulin is so dependent on what you eat. People that might take medications that need to be taken with their food, of course, children, women going through different hormonal changes, those with thyroid issues, and the elderly. So you always want to consult your physician before deciding if intermittent fasting is the right pathway for you. There are different types of intermittent fasting diets. There's this idea of not eating for 16 hours and then eating for 8 hours, or not eating whatever you want for 2 days and then really fasting between these 5 days, or doing a very low calorie diet. So the approaches differ, but I think it's an up and coming area. It's just good to kind of keep your health team on board if it's something that you want to try to make sure it's a good fit. So the next question, which is super appropriate for a cardiology practice, are that eggs are a no-no. So I often get asked, I have high cholesterol, I shouldn't eat eggs. And so what I would say is that eggs are not a no-no. Eggs in moderation are an excellent source of protein. And the biggest difference is that you want to pay attention to dietary cholesterol versus saturated fat. For the most part, it would take you a lot of dietary cholesterol to raise the cholesterol in your blood. We know that for someone who has elevated LDL cholesterol, we want to try to decrease their intake of saturated fat. But having 3 to 5 egg yolks a week, I don't think is going to have a significant impact on their LDL cholesterol. Of course, everyone's different, but eggs are a good source of protein, and they can be used in moderation for those that have high cholesterol. They're also an excellent source of protein, and they're rich in a variety of vitamins and minerals. So they're not something that I want you to avoid. The other question that often gets kind of the way that it comes up is I ask patients if they like vegetables, and they might say something like, I like peas, corn, and potatoes. And while peas and corn and potatoes might be considered a vegetable, which is in case of fact, there is a caveat, which is that corn, potatoes, and peas are what we call starchy vegetables. So they're kind of metabolized in a way like grains are. They don't have a lot of fiber in them, so they're absorbed a bit more rapidly. They can absolutely be included as part of a balanced diet, but when we go back to that Harvard eating plate that we were looking at before, what I tell people is, you know, try to think about your fist and about the size of your fist, and think about that whole grain section of that plate that was on the bottom right corner. You want to do your corn or your peas or your potatoes in that portion, about the size of your fist. And then if you're having corn or peas or potatoes, you might not need to have a lot of brown rice or a lot of pasta or a lot of bread, because you're getting some starch from the corn, peas, and potatoes. The vegetables that I tend to really encourage are things like green leafy cruciferous vegetables, Brussels sprouts and asparagus and salad and peppers and eggplant and zucchini, and thinking about things that are in season now, different leafy greens. All of those are really good for your heart. And so if you're going to include corn, potatoes, and peas, just make sure that you're including some of those other vegetables as well. Next question. With COVID, many of us have been drinking more alcohol perhaps than usual. And so many people wonder if red wine is the only heart-friendly alcohol, or if it's possible that alcohol can be used in moderation as part of a balanced diet. And so the answer to this, myth or fact, red wine is the only heart-friendly alcohol, is actually a myth. So red wine itself is not alone. You know, the serving size recommended by the American Heart Association is 1 drink per day for females and 2 drinks per day for men. And that's a maximum. They're not recommending you do that, but if you do drink alcohol, those are the recommendations that they use. All of the different types of spirits generally confer the same health benefits. Ethanol alcohol has some HDL raising properties. So if you had a small glass of white wine at night and you measured it out, there's the potential that we could see some HDL raising properties from that. The problem is that right now, with everybody at home and us kind of just having more free time, it's hard to just have 1 glass of wine or 1 drink and kind of stay within that confines. And once we start to have 2 or 3 or 4, we're not, aside from it not being great for our health, we're not making the best decisions about what you eat. And anyone, you know, I'm sure has had experience with that. And so kind of thinking, if you're someone who wants to improve your diet, you know, a balanced intake of alcohol can be a part of it, but just keep in mind that it could inhibit some of your decisions around what is a healthy food later on. So my next question, and one of my favorite hacks, is a 20-ounce bottle of Coca-Cola, does that have more sugar than a Cinnabon? So I used to, you know, I think of when I was younger and people would go shopping at the big malls before Amazon, and they'd sell those big Cinnabons in the stands outside the mall or inside the mall. And you think about how much sugar is in those cinnamon buns. Is it possible that a 20-ounce bottle of Coca-Cola has just as much sugar? And how would we really know? By looking at the label. So unfortunately, it is in fact a fact. A 20-ounce bottle of Coca-Cola has 65 grams of sugar. And the reason that we know that that's about 16 packets of sugar is that 4 grams of sugar is like a packet of sugar or a cube of sugar. So if you go to Dunkin' Donuts and you see a packet of sugar, that's 4 grams of sugar. So if you wouldn't sit down and eat 16 packets of sugar, you probably don't want to drink something that has 16 packets of sugar in it. And I think where it gets really confusing is it seems really obvious to us that it's, you know, generally that soda isn't great, but what about things like juice and fresh squeezed juice and iced teas and orange juices? And we'll get into this a little bit later, just looking at the label, but orange juices and different fruit juices, unless you're having, you know, a small six ounce glass a day, actually pack on quite a sugar punch. And you know, it tends to add up very quickly. So what I tell people is, people will say, well, I want the vitamin C from the orange juice, and that's great. And I agree that fruit is an excellent source of vitamin C, but I'd much rather you eat the orange and have a glass of water then drink the orange juice. If you need to take a small amount of juice to take pills or something like that, I would just try to keep it to 4 to 6 ounces. There are many alternatives on the market for alternatives to some of these juices. There's things called hint waters, which are naturally flavored with fruit. There's, some that have alternative sweeteners in them. It's really up to you kind of what you feel most comfortable with. If you can do water with some fresh fruit in it, I think that it's your least expensive and, probably most beneficial beverage of choice, just buying some frozen berries or raspberries and putting them in your water. But I would try to keep these really sugary drinks to a minimum, because something as benign almost as iced tea can pack 10, 12, 14 packets of sugar in it. Oh, and just because this is a cardiology practice, we know that one of the main ways that triglycerides can be elevated is because of sugar-sweetened beverages. So if you're someone who's trying to lower their triglycerides or lower their blood sugar or control their diabetes, kind of removing these sugar-sweetened beverages will have a really big effect. The next thing that I often see, and I learned a lot about when I started working with the cardiologists that I work with, is oftentimes folks will say to me, and it's completely understandable, I don't use salt, so my sodium or salt intake is low. And it would make sense to us that of course, if you don't add salt or adobo or Goya or any of those garlic salt or those seasonings, of course, it would seem as though, your sodium intake would be low. But if you're somebody who has high blood pressure, or you just want to be mindful of your salt intake because you might be dealing with a family history of heart disease or heart disease yourself, it's really important to get familiar with what foods actually have naturally occurring sodium in them. So I listed them out here, and I used to have one of those old cup of noodles like we all ate in college, the Mirachan noodles, and I actually recently just switched it out with a type of ramen noodle that you could see at something like a Whole Foods, because I think it speaks to the way that foods often appear incredibly healthy until we really get down and look at the label. So it's generally a myth. Most sodium in the diet doesn't come from the salt that we add to our foods. That's not to say that adding salt to your food is good for your blood pressure. It's not, and there's many alternatives, but most of the salt that we're getting in the day-to-day is coming from prepared foods, pizza, tomato sauces, meats, pasta sauces, and snack foods. And so when we go back to that quote of eating foods, mostly plants, not too much, it kind of goes back to the idea that many of these processed foods have sodium in them. Sodium is used as a preservative, so they put it in food so it can stay on the shelf for a longer period of time, and so that they taste better. So starting to get comfortable with sodium on the food label is important. And what I generally tell people, and we're gonna go through the label at the end of this presentation, is if you're someone who has elevated blood pressure, there's actually two things that can affect your blood pressure. The first is sodium, and the second is actually sugar. And so I tell people, try to choose foods with 10% or less of the daily value of sodium. So if you're looking at sodium on the food label, go over to that percentage and try to choose foods that have 10% or less. And then go down to that sugar number, and to keep it simple for yourself, try to choose foods that have less than 10 grams of sugar. And that'll be something that will be very helpful to your blood pressure. Sorry about that. It will be really helpful to your blood pressure, just being aware of the different foods that have sodium. Things like breads and bagels and rolls, all of those are white for the most part, and white breads actually tend to have a fair amount of sodium in them as well, compared to their whole grain counterpart. Which brings us to this multigrain question. So myth or fact, multigrain products aren't necessarily whole grain. So this gets a little confusing because there's a lot of products out there that say multigrain, made with 7 grains, made with 10 grains, but how do we really know that what we're getting is actually whole grain? And the trick to it is when you're looking at the ingredient list of a food, you want to go right down to the bottom and check for the word whole before the first comma. So if you see something that says whole oat or whole grain or whole wheat, just make sure that you find that word whole before the first comma, because then we know that it hasn't been processed, the bran and the fiber hasn't been removed and then put back in. We want you to try to aim for breads and really any grain that has at least 3 grams of fiber. We're going to talk about fiber in a second, but fiber is one of the main ways that you can keep your heart healthy, that you can lower your blood pressure, lower your cholesterol, and lower your blood sugar. So you want to try to make sure that you've looked at the ingredient list and you've checked out the amount of fiber that the food has. So I'm wondering how you're all doing with these myth versus facts, and I hope that you've gotten some of them right. If not, you've learned something, and we're going to keep going. We're just going to pause for a second and talk a little bit about fiber. So I call fiber my most valuable tool, and the types of patients that I work with are patients with high cholesterol, high blood pressure, and patients or that have elevated blood sugar, but mostly related to obesity and needing to lose weight. And so my most valuable tool for weight loss and for keeping your heart healthy is a naturally occurring piece of food, which is called fiber. So fiber is in fruits, and it's in vegetables, and it's in whole grains, and it's in nuts and seeds, and they've put some prebiotic fibers, things like inulin and chicory root, into different types of foods, and that goes back to kind of that discussion we were having about feeding the gut. Fiber-rich foods are good for your gut. They're also really good for your heart. And adults generally need somewhere between 25 to 35 grams of fiber per day. Our ancestors actually used to eat somewhere between 40 to 50 grams of fiber a day, snacking on things like nuts and seeds. And so as a population, I'd say that we generally probably get between 8 or 10 grams of fiber a day. Fiber is not going to be in donuts or pastries or white breads or pizzas. It's going to be in, again, going back to that eating whole foods, mostly plants, not too much. It's going to be in those types of foods. Fiber lowers something called your net carbohydrate. So we all eat carbohydrates in our, as part of our diet, and we need them for energy for our body. But when we include fiber, that part of the carbohydrate, it doesn't get absorbed as well, and it actually moves through us. So we lower something called our net carb, or the absorbable amount of carbohydrate, which helps to manage weight. Fiber is often hard to spot, and it's hard to find. So getting yourself familiar with food sources that are rich in fiber and brands is really important. We actually gave you today, you'll be able to walk away from the webinar with some handouts that have some helpful information on fiber, and some tips and tricks on how to get more of it into your diet. Okay, my next myth or fact is 15 minutes of exercise a day enough? And I thought this was really timely because, prior, for those who were working, we were going into the office and commuting, and the Boston commute, or where, the Massachusetts commute in general, makes kind of working exercise into your day-to-day kind of difficult. And so what if somebody comes to me and they've never exercised before, or they want to start exercising? Is 15 minutes of exercise a day enough? It's a myth, right? So meaning that, and just to go back to the question, 15 minutes of exercise a day isn't enough. That's a myth. Every little bit counts when it comes to exercise. So I defer to your cardiologist, but I generally tell people 150 minutes a week of a mix of cardio and resistance weight training is really beneficial. 15-minute intervals absolutely count. So when the new normal becomes the way that things used to be, or in our new normal, if you are someone who's going to a store or taking the train, parking your car maybe a little bit further away and making the walk, or having a break between meetings, or these Zoom meetings that many of us are on, like we are right now, between two meetings, and taking 15 minutes and walking your dog around the block, or some people have even gone to the point of buying like little trampolines, or getting outside and just doing squats, or just even walking around, as I mentioned. And that 15-minute jump makes a big, big difference. And so there's different kind of apps and things that you can use. The Peloton app is a free app, not the bike. The app itself is a free app for the first 90 days. And it's not actually just the bike riding. It's a mix of mat and resistance training exercises. Exhale is a local gym that we have here in Boston, but I know that they are nationwide, and they offer their app free for 30 days. And so if you're someone who thinks you can get your cardio in by going around the block, or getting on a treadmill that you have at home, if you want kind of more of a mix of resistance, you could try some of these different apps if you're interested. Also, your on demand at home on your TV is another good source. Questions around omega-3s, especially for cardiology and heart health. So omega-3s are fats that are good for your heart. They boost something called your HDL cholesterol. They're great for your brain. They do amazing things for your hair and your skin and nails, and they're really important, and they're hard to get if you don't eat fish. And so sometimes I'm working with a patient who doesn't eat any fish at all. And they're, being aware of other sources of omega-3s is really important. So things like flax seeds and chia seeds, walnuts and Brussels sprouts and spinach, cauliflower. The Brussels sprouts have ALA in them that is converted to omega-3. So one type of fatty acid that's converted into omega-3. When you cook them, spinach and soybeans are all good sources. If you can try to find a way to work in an omega-3 rich fish, ideally into your diet once or even twice a week, that's an excellent thing. My only caveat to that is things like tuna and swordfish tend to be a bit higher in mercury. So you probably want to keep your swordfish to, once or twice a month. And you probably want to keep it to 1 to 2 cans of tuna a week, but I wouldn't go over that. Things like salmon and sardines and anchovies is free reign, and those are absolutely excellent for your heart. So just some tips on ways to get those in if you are a fish lover. So some suggestions, some people like tuna or salmon salad, working in walnuts or different seeds into kind of a power mix. Hummus has some omega-3s in them because it actually, for hummus that's made with tahini, because tahini is actually an excellent source of omega-3s. And then if you're someone who likes to make smoothies, doing a teaspoon of ground flaxseed or chia seed into your smoothie might help to balance it out a little bit better, and will also give you a good dose of omega-3s. Chia seeds and flax seeds, you just want to be mindful of the amount that you start off with. So if you're someone who's never used chia seeds or flax seeds, you don't want to just go and put a bunch of tablespoons into your smoothie because they can upset your stomach. So you just want to kind of ease into that one a little bit. Things like cauliflower we talked about are all good dietary sources of omega-3s. The other thing I just wanted to mention along the lines of omega-3s is, and again, this is really your crash course in nutrition, but for those interested, if you've been recommended by your cardiologist or by your doctor or by your dietitian to take an omega-3 and they've asked you to go buy it at a store, you want to make sure that you're getting the true amount of omega-3 that's in the supplement. So EPA and DHA are 2 types of fatty acids, and they are what we consider the true amount of omega-3. So when you're looking at an omega-3 bottle, what you want to check out is how much EPA and DHA the omega-3 has. If you're someone whose doctor has never suggested you take an omega-3, I'd much rather you get your omega-3s through food. But if you're someone who's taking an omega-3 for your triglycerides, let's say, you want to make sure that you're really focusing on this EPA DHA number and not things that say other omega-3s, because you're not going to get the same benefit from those. So now that we've gone through some of our myths or facts, the question becomes, are any of these foods healthy? And so I tried to pull some of the foods that I get asked about the most. And we're going to kind of go through and decipher the label a little bit and figure out which ones are good choices and which ones we probably want to skip. So cereal is an incredibly difficult one. Many cereals that are available to us now have a lot of sugar in them. My favorite brands of cereal tend to be ones that are richer in fiber, things like Kashi or Fiber One or All Bran, and even the flavored variants I'm okay with. Things like Raisin Bran, Lucky Charms, we probably want to keep for special occasions. When we're looking at a food being healthy or not, the big thing to remember is that if you want to improve your diet, you have to show yourself some compassion in the sense that no one is going to follow a perfect diet. So if you can eat healthy 80% of the time, then 20% of the time you've got to live. You've got to enjoy that cold Coke or that, ice cream out with your kids or your friends or your grandkids. It's all about balance. It's never saying I'm never going to eat this. It's about saying, okay, if it's 80-20, 2 or 3 times a week, I can have a little treat. I can have an indulgence and kind of looking at it that way. So let's find out if these foods are healthy or not. Okay, so I like to call these foods health halos. So I'm looking at the Raisin Bran, the orange juice, which we discussed, and the Naked smoothie drinks. And just to start with the Naked drink, if we look right here, so this is really advertising at its finest, and people get paid lots of money to make this drink look as healthy as they can. So here is a kale blazer veggie-based drink. You can look at these Naked drinks similarly to some of the juices that you might buy at the expensive juice stores, or so I think there's places called Fresh and Pressed, and then also the ones that you can buy, things like Adwala is kind of another variant of Naked. So Adwala is owned by Coca-Cola. Naked, I believe, might be owned by PepsiCo. The people that are doing the marketing on these things are the same people that are selling the sodas. So we just want to kind of get really familiar with the landscape. So looking at the label here, it promotes that it's 100% juice, but we want to really know what's inside of it. So going over to the green drink, ingredients are generally listed in order of abundance. And they have to be. They're not generally, I'm sorry. They have to be listed in order of abundance. So the first place that I want you to look is the ingredient list. So for this green vegetable drink, the main ingredients are apple juice, mango puree, so mango juice, pineapple juice, banana puree, so pureed bananas, pureed kiwis, and then they start working in some things called something called spirulina. And then down after natural flavors that they've added in, they have a little bit of green algae, odorless garlic, ginger root, but the majority of this drink is juice. So you'd be much better off making that kale drink at home than you would paying $7 or $8 for this juice. If we go over onto this side, this gives you the serving size. The first place we always want to look is the serving size, because that tells us how much we're kind of looking at on the label. This food has 2 servings per container. So if you drink this small thing of, it's a bit small. I mean, this is probably, I think something like, 16 ounces. So about the size of a water bottle. You need to double everything on this label. So there's 28 grams of sugar in this. So you're getting 56 grams of sugar in this green drink, which is a substantial amount of sugar. So if we take 56 and we divide it by 4, we're looking at 14, 15, 16, I'm not the greatest at math, packets of sugar in what's supposed to be a vegetable drink. So I think getting to know the label is really important. Now, what you don't get from this drink is the fiber. So fiber is naturally occurring in vegetables, and we know it's good for our heart. You don't get any in this drink because it's mostly juice. Same for over here. So 23 grams of sugar. If you do 8 ounces, divide that by 4, you're looking at 5 to 6 packets of sugar, and their fiber isn't even listed here. They didn't even put it on the label. So again, I'd much rather you, but it's certified. So the marketing is really tough. And so kind of looking at the label and saying, okay, how much sugar does this have and how much fiber does it have is important. Going over to the cereal, kind of a general rule of thumb when we're looking at the label is about 15 grams of carb is about the size, it would be about a slice of bread. So this cereal in 1 cup has about 3 slices of bread in it. So you can think about it that way. It does have some fiber in it. And if we know that we want to get somewhere between 25 to 35 grams a day, it's not a bad amount of fiber, but you can probably find a cereal that's a little bit lower carb than one like this. And again, the handouts we give will have some suggestions on what to look for and different brands and things like that. But just starting to get familiar with the way that things are advertised. I didn't discuss Diet Coke. I definitely, would recommend if you are a Coke drinker that you switch to diet, but I don't love Diet Coke either. It's not great for your heart. It's a rich source of salt. I have a lot of patients who have moved over to something called Zevia. It's called Zevia, which is a stevia-based soda. that they tend to like. There's something called Spindrift seltzers that are excellent. Those don't have caffeine, but they're just naturally flavored seltzers with fruit. I really like those. Activia, kind of feeding the microbiome, going off marketing of something being good for your gut. I would much rather you just eat simple Greek yogurt than something like Activia, because you're going to get a fair amount of sugar in that. Same goes for the Special K bars. Bars that I tend to like are bars that have more fiber than sugar. So there's brands, there's the Kind only 5-gram sugar bars. There's a brand called Raw Rev Glow bars. There's a brand called Nugo Slim bars, and all of those have low saturated fat, high fiber, low sugar, and they taste pretty decent. And over time, I've kind of started to learn what some of these brands are, but they are always changing. We talked a lot about juice. I'm not going to exhaust this too much, but watch out for things that claim to be detoxifying or, giving you like a clean, refresh start. Your liver actually does that for you. The liver, the organ in your body, actually detoxifies things naturally. You don't need to spend, $20 on a juice, even if it tells you it's like a detoxifier. I'd much rather you just eat the fruit and try to pair it with some kind of protein or healthy fat. So kind of to wrap up in terms of being a label detective and really paying attention to that nutrition facts label. So we want you to first look at the serving size. Then we want you to pay attention to how many carbohydrates something has, how much sugar it has. Try to choose grains with more fiber than sugar. And one thing that we did not, I just want to mention briefly is not all fats are bad. So saturated fats and trans fats are the fats that affect your LDL cholesterol. And so your cardiologist might ask you to limit your saturated fats if you're someone who has high LDL cholesterol, and really try to avoid trans fats. But mono and polyunsaturated fats, which are the fats that we find in fish and nuts and seeds and avocados and olives, and we think of more as the Mediterranean diet type fats, those are really good for your heart, and those help to boost your HDL cholesterol. So don't spend time looking at the total fat number. Really pay attention to the breakdown. Okay. And then just before I wrap up, just a piece about eating in this new normal. So I think that this is a really hard time for myself and for a lot of people, because we're in a way much more sedentary than we were before. I find myself sitting in my kitchen behind this desk for 8 hours a day sometimes, and only getting up once or twice. And it's really hard to kind of walk away from the computer when you're working from home. So what I tell people is to set up a place for work that's not in your kitchen if you can. If you can move it out into the living room, or you can move it into your bedroom so the food isn't right in front of you, then that tends to be a little bit more helpful. Scheduling a time for lunch and snacks, much like you would try to do in your daily work day, or if you're retired in your kind of day-to-day. The goal is for people to eat every 3 to 4 hours, so you don't go into meals too hungry and you don't leave uncomfortably full. Focusing on fiber, so trying to choose snacks and meals that are rich sources of fiber that'll sustain you for longer periods of time, and especially paired with protein will definitely be more satisfying. Drinking plenty of water, taking a break from the screens, which is, I think, even harder than it was before, and promoting a food safe house. And what I mean by a food safe house is that if you're wanting to eat healthy and you're wanting to improve your diet, it has to be a family-based approach. So a husband and a husband, or a husband and a wife, or a mom and a dad, or a mom and a kid, one of them can't be eating healthy if nobody else is. So it's all about the food environment at home, and it is a commitment. And trying not to eat out of the bag, eating, with big bags in front of you, trying to portion it out ahead of time will absolutely help kind of reduce portion size. And with that being said, just showing yourself some compassion, because this is a really unprecedented time, and we, myself included, are all trying to find ways to navigate through this new normal when it comes to staying healthy. So just being kind to yourself in that regard is really important. So to wrap up, before I get to questions, starting with that slide, eating foods, mostly plants, not too much, eating every 3 to 4 hours, trying not to skip meals, trying to make half of what you're eating fruits and vegetables, skipping out on the added sugars like things in juice, focus and soda and lemonades and teas, focusing on fiber, trying to avoid health halos, so things that are advertised as healthy, eating free and away from the screens if you can, and getting out there and getting active are all, if you can do one of these things over the next couple of months, it will benefit your heart and your health a great deal. So I just wanted to mention, I am doing a video series that we just launched. It's a subscription-based series where you can sign up and get a tip like this every week to your email box. So if you're interested, feel free to check it out. It's on the website. I also offer, as Dr. Hedgepath Kelly mentioned, one-on-one counseling, and you can always reach out to me via email. I have Instagram for those that are on it, or through the website, and that's my contact information there. So thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, and I'd be happy to kind of answer your questions.
Thank you so much, Skyler. This is awesome. Maybe take the screen share off so that we see you here.
Great.
There are amazing, wonderful questions here in the Q&A and in the chat. So I think I'll start with, you know, I love your approach, which is not just the food, but the whole environment, and taking a healthy, balanced approach to life in general, especially during these stressful times.
Yes.
It's not easy to do, but it's something.
No, it's hard for me. Like, I'm learning as well as we go. So yeah.
Now, a lot of people tend to gravitate towards diets that maybe help them restrict what they're eating, like the keto diet, the paleo diet, the vegan diet. What is your take on those? Is there one that you would recommend, or do you generally discourage people from trying to glom onto a diet like that?
So I think diet in and of itself can feel kind of restrictive for people and difficult to follow. So I don't tend to recommend a specific diet. If there's a approach to eating that I like the best, it's probably the Mediterranean diet, just because I find it to be the most well studied. But I think, you know, I tend to look at it less, and there are benefits to every diet, right? The vegan diet isn't bad. The paleo diet isn't bad. The keto diet isn't bad, but it's not right for everyone. If you're someone who has high cholesterol, you probably shouldn't be doing a ketogenic diet. So I think it's finding, you know, a couple lifestyle changes that feel sustainable and feel doable. So if it's focusing on fiber, or it's focusing on just eating whole grains or fish, you know, 1 or 2 of those things a week is going to make a big difference. If people are interested in cookbooks or diet suggestions, probably the Mediterranean diet would be where I would steer them.
No, I agree. From a cardiac standpoint, that's the one that has the most data for preventing heart attacks.
Exactly.
And strokes. So, great. Allison, I'll turn it over to you for the next question.
Well, I think that's a really smart approach, and I can see in the chat that there are some people asking about, you know, more about those specific diets or what has or hasn't worked for them. And I'll just give my 2 cents while we're on this subject, because it's really frustrating if you find a program that works for you and then your neighbor across their street, you know, butts in and, you know, and puts their 2 cents in, or your mother or a friend. And I think that just highlights the complexity of what we're talking about. And Skyler, you did a wonderful job with some really nice general recommendations. And it's good for us to have these backbones, but to really get into the weeds and have something that is useful, we probably have to do it one-on-one and have some personalized lab work and your medical history to really guide us on what your goals are.
Right.
Because I have been fooled by just looking at someone and making up assumptions, and you do the blood work, and guess what? You can't tell who's a diabetic, right? You can't tell who has cholesterol issues. So I think, you know, with all of this, we're trying to give healthy recommendations to the group, but there, that one-on-one with you, I think is really crucial.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. And I think working alongside a doctor is actually, I think it's a team-based approach, right?
Definitely. You know, for a lot of these changes, we all live in a society that we want the results tomorrow. And, you know, we're talking about, you know, seeing results in 3 to 6 months, having these be healthy changes that we really incorporate in. So we do have to have some degree of patience, which is really hard in this in our world where everything is real time and we want it yesterday. So I'll just put that out there as well. Some of these specific questions, though, I think are good maybe to go over. So there are some questions about yogurt. And I get asked a lot about this because it's really so heavily marketed as healthy. Yep. So how do you pick yogurt, organic, non-organic, sweetened, not sweetened, active culture? Give us an overview.
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. So I don't harp too much on a Greek yogurt being flavored or not flavored, because Greek yogurt itself has a good amount of protein. So when we think about kind of the way your body reacts to something that has protein, it keeps you feeling fuller for a longer period of time. So you can, if you're someone who can tolerate Greek yogurt, I'd say start there, even if you want to do a flavored one. Anytime you can do organic dairy and meat, if you're able to, I think that's a great thing. And so if you're able to do an organic low-fat yogurt, again, it's super individualized. So if you're someone who has high cholesterol, I'd probably say, we probably want to aim on like the 0 or 1% Greek yogurts. If you're someone who is looking for something more satiating, maybe you can do the 2% Greek yogurts. There are some brands I like. There's a brand called Siggy's that's pretty good. I like Wallaby, which is an organic Greek yogurt. Those with live and active cultures, I think are ideal just because they feed the microbiome and they're good for the gut. I think that if you're able to do Greek, I'd start there and then kind of take it from there.
That's great. And I love, your recommendations in general, to beef up the protein, because I do think a lot of us, are light on the protein and it's really satiating. So,
right.
So thank you. Let's see what other questions we have here.
Can you, actually, I have one that's in the Q&A here. Can you address artificial sweeteners? So you mentioned stevia or Zevia as part of stevia. What about the others, or what do you think of stevia?
So artificial sweeteners, it's funny. I kind of look at, so it's kind of the way I look at Diet Coke, like it's the lesser of two evils. You know what I mean? Like in an ideal world, I would love someone to not use a lot of artificial sweeteners. Stevia is a plant-based artificial sweetener. It's probably, out of all the artificial sweeteners, the one that I might say is, okay to use. I think everything in moderation. If you're really trying to improve your health and kick the soda habit, Zevia is a great alternative for that. But you don't want to drink 10 or 12 of them a day. If you're someone who feels like they're going to drink a lot of those, then I'd have you switch to seltzer. So I think, I tend to not encourage a lot of Equal or Splenda or Sweet and Low unless you're trying to move away from already eating a lot of sugar. We know that some of those alternative sweeteners can increase your propensity to kind of want something really sweet later. Yeah. And so it can kind of mess with your microbiome, with your gut bacteria, but also kind of with your blood sugar a little bit too.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Better than sugar, but not better than nothing.
Yeah. So I think if you're doing a lot of sugar, try to move to the alternative sweeteners, and maybe over time, you can move to less and just doing, a little bit less of them. I think sugar is incredibly hard. I think it's very addictive. I think that, it's almost like if you have dessert 3 nights in a row and you don't have dessert, or you have the piece of chocolate 3 nights in a row and you try not to have the piece of chocolate, it's really hard to not have something. And so kind of weaning yourself slowly off sugar is probably the best bet, because it is kind of, it's addictive, I think.
I just did a no sugar challenge with my kids, and it was really hard. They survived the week, but we really focused on exploring different fruits that we wouldn't normally try for dessert. And it was really a fun mental exercise. And you also then really appreciate, how sweet some of these things are, and the differences between berries and mangoes and pineapple and, some of these things we might not have on a regular basis. So I'll just put that plug out there for self-experimentation and, and just see how you're responding to, these little changes.
Yeah. Or even saying, I'm going to have dessert twice a week and I'll have fruit the other nights, like So it doesn't feel so, you know, so if you just want to ease into it even, but I think sugar-free for a week, that's impressive. That's hard.
Well, I will say, in full disclosure, my daughter's birthday is today, so it was in preparation that we would be having some acceptable treats and desserts. So there you go. It looks like there's some other couple general questions about acid reflux and how diet can impact that, especially when you're having symptoms and maybe reaching for some of those simple carbohydrates or bread products to really alleviate, you know, symptoms. Any advice for kind of approaching that? Because that's a common complaint, I think.
Yeah, so I think the thing about acid reflux to start is that it can, so we know it can be weight related. So as people lose weight, their acid reflux can actually improve. And then on top of that, and I'm sure many people with acid reflux have already been told this, so not to repeat it, but, you know, not going to bed right after you eat, not eating spicy foods or, you know, a lot of chocolatey foods. But I think if you're still experiencing a lot of acid reflux and you feel like the white carbohydrates tend to make you feel better, what you could try could be some of those like white whole grain carbohydrates. So again, I like people to really go for the word whole before the first comma, so the less processed ones. But if they feel like they need something white, maybe they do some of those white whole grain breads, sweet potatoes, things that tend to be kind of less reactive, less spicy, less seasoned. Acid reflux, you know, I tend to notice that as people cut down on the sugar and on, you know, the high fat foods, it does get better. But if you feel like you need to reach for that white one, try to reach for something that might be labeled white, but might have still a little bit of fiber or whole grain in it.
That's great. Let's see, looks like we have time for one more question. And then what we'll try to do is, Skyler, send you these after, and maybe if you wouldn't mind, if there's
sure
answerable, do that. If you want to pick one off of here, there's one about protein for people who are working out. There's one about thyroid issues. Anything that you want to?
Oh, there's one about tuna too. I think that's a good one. Any difference between light and albacore? Canned light white tuna is best if you can do it. So protein, I can't see that question, but so protein, we think about protein needs. You can actually calculate how much protein you need yourself based on your weight. And then you would want to chat with a dietitian just about what is a safe range of protein. But for most adults, it's somewhere between what we say based on your weight in kilograms. So your weight divided by 2.2. 0.8 to 1.2 is a general recommendation. So 0.8 grams to 1.2 grams per kilogram of your body weight. You don't want to overdo protein because it's tough on the kidneys. And if you can try to do more plant-based proteins, so things like beans and nuts and seeds, or eggs, even, you know, it's probably better than a lot of red meats. So I hope that answers that question.
Do you think that people, and then we can wrap up, but do you think that people who are working out and weight training
yes
protein?
Yeah, so they might need something, and again, you know, this is something they can chat about with a dietitian, but you know, 1.5 to 1.6 grams per kilogram might be more appropriate for them, and making sure that they're getting a good hit of protein post-workout with a little bit of carbohydrate is really important.
Great. And should that protein be throughout the day? A lot of people get all their protein at dinner and very little at breakfast.
Yeah, so anytime you have a fruit or a grain, you want to think about combining it with some kind of protein or fat because it'll stabilize your blood sugar. So it should be protein at breakfast, protein at lunch, protein at dinner. Ideally somewhere between, you know, at least a deck of card size or about the size of the palm of your hand is kind of a good reference point.
Perfect. All right. I think unless, Allison, if you have a burning question, I think we should stop there. And thank you so much, Skyler. We learned.
You're welcome.
Wonderful. So we'll send you a couple of these questions if you don't mind, then we'll send it out to people with your contact information.
Awesome.
You take insurance, Medicare, or?
I don't, but I do provide super bills for reimbursement.
Okay.
And then the subscription series, if people aren't willing, you know, aren't ready to kind of jump on for a full visit, they can get some information there.
Okay, perfect. And I think that's true for most nutritionists, dietitians, is that even if you do take insurance, often insurance doesn't cover. So it's a tricky world out there, but
it is.
Thank you for your time today, and hopefully everybody learned as much as we did.
Thank you so much. It was great to meet you all.
It was fun. Thank you, Skyler.